Let's look at the situation I inherited when I became mayor in 1996. Carmel, we knew based on studies and the amount of land we have 49 square miles in Clay Township, which is Carmel, which is, if you took New York City and started just right where Harlem ends, about 122nd Street and Columbia University is, went all the way down to the tip, Battery Park, that looks out in the Statue of Liberty, almost all of Manhattan. That's about 50 square miles. So it's a big amount of space. Carmel's 12 miles, 12 and a half miles across the top at 146th Street, 5.5 miles from north to south throughout. And we looked at it, and so we knew that we were going to have 110 or 120,000 people on all the lots we're built on, but yet our downtown was about 3.5 blocks long and old and beat up. And in fact, in that first election, when I talked to voters, people disagreed about where our downtown was. Some thought it was the big office buildings along 31. Others thought it was the shopping center, 116th and Keystone. Others looked back to that old village area. So what we did, we worked with a group of business people and said, where's our retail strip? Well, we ran along Range Line or Westfield Road from north to south, and right in the middle of it, a few years earlier, they built Government Complex, beautiful new buildings in the Georgian colonial style. But yet right next to it was an abandoned strip center. So often happens in this country, developers will come in, build a building meant to last 20 or 30 years, and they know it's going to fall down because that's the way they built it at that point, and they're going to replace it. I don't think that's sustainable or a good way to do it. But here we had this strip center that was virtually abandoned. The grocery store had moved across the street in a new building since the old one was 30 years old. You go to Europe, buildings 500 and 600 years old, and they're still using them. In fact, how many people in this room have been to Europe on vacation in the last few years? Okay, quite a few of you. So what do you do when you go there? You walk around and look at the beautiful old cities, don't you? Does it ever occur to you why our cities can't be built like that? And that was one of the questions we asked some of our strategic partners. Why can't we do a better job of making walkable cities where people don't have to drive 100 miles a day to go from home to work to school to pick up clothes at the cleaners or whatever they're doing that day? Why can't we make it more walkable, and when they do have to make car trips, they're short trips? We tried to re-examine with various groups, neighborhood groups, business groups. Why is it? In fact, I always have fun with this. I speak to a lot of third graders every year about government, and I'm explaining, what the different departments do. And I get to zoning. You see all these blank looks on these 8-year-old faces. And I say to them, how many of you live in a house, an apartment, or a condominium? And they all raise their hands. I say, okay, how many of you live next to a factory? No hands go up. Of course, there aren't many factories in Carmel. And then I say, how many of you live next to a store? No hands go up. And I say, is that a good thing? And they all say, oh, yeah, because we don't want the smoke of the store, and we don't want the cars and the traffic. They've been listening to their parents. And then I say to them, I said, do you guys get an allowance? And they all shake their heads, yes. And I say, wouldn't it be kind of cool to be able to take your allowance money and walk next door and buy candy? And suddenly half the class flips. But I get them to, then I can explain what zoning is and why you have such tense discussions about that sometimes in the public forums. But the point is that it's not such a bad idea. No one wants to go on a romantic walk with your spouse past the Walmart parking lot on one side and the 5-lane road on the other. Anybody do that recently? On the other hand, picture a nice cafe with a building moved up to the street with a row of cars parked along the street to kind of protect the people on the sidewalk. And suddenly you get a different vision, a different feel of how that street could be. We threw out all thousands of years of history about city design when the car came along. Thought we know better. But the pendulum, I think, is starting to swing back to designing cities that are prettier, aesthetically more pleasing. And the cities that are able to do that are going to be the ones that attract the entrepreneurs. Richard Florida wrote the book called The Creative Class, the architects, the engineers, the scientists. How do you attract those people? Well, you attract them by making your city prettier, more beautiful, and raising the quality of life. So as we went through a lot of this discussion in the early years of our administration, we laid out how we thought we'd like to see this city built. And we knew we had that little downtown area. We knew we had that empty shopping center right next to the government thing. We had this long retail strip. Then we had a bunch of old 1950s industrial stuff that had been more or less abandoned in that area as well. So the city, why don't developers come in and redevelop the inside, the inner parts of our city, what we would call the inner city, whether it's a big city, an older city like Indianapolis, or a place like Carmel. Well, they don't do it. Everyone's blaming the banks these days. I haven't seen any bankers I know yet out there, so I'll do it too. The lenders tell the developers, you know, if you go buy a 10-acre site in the middle of a city, you've got brownfield issues, you've got utilities that have been there forever that you might dig into that aren't well mapped, you've got small cut-up lots. You go out in the green field somewhere, create the opportunity for me to build more $7 million a mile roads to it. That's easier for the banks because it's kind of a tried and true thing. And so the capital in this country has tend to favor a lot of sprawl. The costs are very hidden as because that road may not have to be done for a few years. And so let's see, $7 million a mile and $7 million a mile this way and so on.